I thought I had the perfect marriage, until I caught my wife with another man. But instead of just walking away, I did what I do best. I investigated. What I uncovered wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated betrayal. And trust me, they never saw what was coming. As soon as Danny brought her in, I knew this case was going to be trouble. Not because of her, but because of whatever mess she was about to drop in my lap. It was just a gut feeling, the kind that comes with the job. She hesitated at the doorway, her posture tense. "Hello, Mr. Carter?" she asked nervously. I gave her a nod. "Nick Carter, ma'am." And no, not like the pop singer. I get that a lot. It was one of the hazards of being a private investigator with a famous name in Los Angeles. My dad had actually named me after a secret agent from an old set of dime store novels, Nick Carter, Master Detective. We already had the last name, so he figured, why not? But he went with just Nick, not Nicholas. Go figure. As I spoke, I rose from my chair and extended my hand. She shook it lightly, still carrying that nervous energy. "What can I do for you, ma'am?" "Your assistant said you could help me." "I was referred by one of your previous clients," she said, offering a small but uncertain smile. "All right, Mrs. Janine Linder," she answered. "My husband is Dennis Linder. He's a psychologist, and I have reason to believe he's cheating on me. I need proof before I file for divorce." With that, she handed me a photograph. I took a good look. Dennis Linder appeared to be around 40, with a strong jawline, dark hair graying at the temples, and sharp green eyes. He had the kind of looks that could easily turn heads. "Okay, Mrs. Linder, you know how this works?" I asked. She nodded. "Good. Give me 2 weeks, tops, and I'll get you the evidence you need. My fee is $5,000 for that time frame. Is that acceptable?" "Yes," she confirmed, "and half up front, correct?" I leaned back slightly, studying her. "Do you have an account your husband doesn't have access to? Somewhere you can safely move money without him noticing?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I set it up a few months ago just in case I needed to hire someone to track him. Your former client told me you're the best." She handed me a cashier's check for $2,500. I took it, tucking it into my desk drawer. "All right," I said, "tell me what's been making you suspicious. The more details I get now, the easier it'll be to track his movements." She exhaled slowly, glancing down as if gathering her thoughts. "It's strange because I never thought I'd notice anything. He spends every night at home with me and we're together most weekends. But sometimes when I call his office to meet him for lunch, his phone is turned off." I frowned slightly. "Well, he's a psychologist, could be that a session ran over." I shrugged. Normally that would make sense. But then there's the distance at home. "He used to be all over me and now, he barely touches me," she said, frustration creeping into her voice. She shifted in her seat before continuing. "Then I started noticing this perfume on his clothes. At first I thought I was imagining it, but it wasn't my brand." I leaned back, considering. Could be from a client. Maybe someone hugged him. She scoffed. "Maybe, but it doesn't explain everything." "How old is he?" I asked. 44. I nodded. "Well, I've heard that men in their mid-40s sometimes experience a drop in their sex drive. Could that be part of the reason he's distant?" Her expression darkened. "You sound like you think I'm being paranoid," she snapped. "Not at all, ma'am. I'm just trying to piece together why you suspect him. I'll admit, the perfume is a pretty strong indicator, but it could be circumstantial." She didn't seem convinced, but I wasn't there to argue. I was there to get the truth. "I'll be in touch as soon as I find anything," I assured her. "Danny, my assistant, has your information, so I'll get your number from her." I walked her to the door and promised once again to keep her updated. As soon as Janine was gone, Danny strolled in and flopped down onto the overstuffed chair in front of my desk. Daniela Velasquez had been my assistant for 6 years, and truth be told, I'd be lost without her, and she knew it. She wasn't the type to date often, but when she did, she was picky. With her jet black hair and warm brown eyes, she turned heads without even trying. Even though I paid her well, we weren't just boss and assistant. We were more like partners. We split each case 60-40, including retainer fees. Those fees, stacked up between multiple clients, meant that after expenses I cleared about $50,000 a year, while Danny pulled in around $110,000, after taxes. We also shared a lawyer, Wesley Quinton. He specialized in divorce disputes and other domestic issues, and in exchange for legal advice, we handled some investigative work for him. It was a fair trade and it kept us both busy. I had been in this line of work for a while now, but my path here wasn't exactly traditional. I spent 3 years in the Army as a military intelligence interrogator before getting recruited by a private firm to investigate insurance fraud. That job eventually led me to where I was now, running my own PI business, sifting through the lies people told to protect their secrets. As for Danny, she had her own past, one that she didn't talk about much. There was always something that seemed to hold her back, something unspoken. But after all these years, I'd learned not to press. Some things people only reveal when they're ready. I made up my mind. When I got home, I was going to confront her. No more dodging, no more half-truths. I'd be a fool not to see the writing on the wall, and I'd seen this pattern play out too many times over the years. It was always the same: a husband or wife suddenly growing emotionally distant, either just before or just after an affair began. Up until now, every time I asked Sammy what was wrong, she brushed me off, claiming nothing was going on. But tonight I was going to get answers. I didn't have to wait long. The moment I walked in, I saw them. My wife, lips locked with some guy. The sight didn't even shock me. It was just confirmation of what I already knew. I kept my composure, staying as calm as possible as I snapped pictures with my phone. They were too caught up in each other to notice at first. Then when they finally did, Sammy jumped back, her face pale with guilt. "Oh my God, Nick. You scared me," she stammered. I hit the record button on the pocket recorder I always carried, right where it belonged, in my pocket. "Care to explain why you're kissing some guy in my house, soon-to-be ex-wifey?" I asked, raising an eyebrow as I shut my phone. Sammy exhaled sharply, trying to regain her composure. "It's part of the reason I wanted you to come home, Nick." I finally turned my attention to the man standing beside her, sizing him up. Recognition hit me like a punch to the gut, and for a brief second, I had the urge to do something I'd regret. But I kept my cool. Well, Dr. Dennis Linder, huh?" I said, my voice laced with mock admiration. "I've heard you're really good at what you do. Psychology, right?" He straightened up, clearly pleased with himself. "Yes, psychology. My methods are sometimes controversial, but I always get results," he said, practically preening. I forced a smirk. "That so? Tell me, Doc, how long has my wife been seeing you for therapy?" Sammy had never once mentioned going to a shrink. 2 months now, he confirmed, as if this was just another normal session. 2 months. Long enough for her to lie to my face, to keep sneaking off behind my back. And now I had more evidence than I even needed. "Nick, this won't change anything between us," Sammy insisted, flashing a weak smile, the kind she always used when she was trying to get her way. "I still love you." I laughed, shaking my head. That was the moment I knew she was lying. "You still love me?" I repeated. "That's rich." "I just needed something different," she said, almost pleading. "Just this once." I let out a slow breath, pretending to consider it. "Well, for the record, I don't want you to do this. And there will be consequences if you go through with it." Linder cleared his throat, stepping forward like he actually had the nerve to try and take control of the situation. "Mr. Carter, please allow me to do my job." I clenched my jaw as he continued, completely unfazed. "Now, do you have a chair in your bedroom?" he asked, as if he had any right to be in my house, let alone my bedroom. That's when it became clear. He wanted to sleep with my wife right here, under my roof, like I was supposed to step aside and let it happen. But Sammy? She was already damaged goods to me. There was no point in fighting for her. The only thing I cared about now was gathering every piece of evidence I needed to make sure they both paid for this. I wasn't about to go to jail over either of them. But I would make sure they had a meeting with karma soon enough. "I'm still not agreeing to this," I said, shaking my head even as I followed them into the master bedroom. With a steady hand, I slipped my iPhone from my pocket, started recording, and kept my movements subtle. Dr. Linder undressed Sammy first, guiding her onto my bed like he had every right to be there. Sammy stripped down as well, completely oblivious to the fact that I was still sitting there, watching. Neither of them spared me a glance. I waited. Just long enough. Then, in a voice as calm and measured as ever, I said, "All right. Show's over. Get dressed, grab your things, and get the hell out of here." The effect was immediate. Sammy gasped, and Dr. Linder froze in place, his expression shifting from confusion to sheer terror. "Good." I turned to look at the woman who had just shattered my heart. "Samantha, get dressed. Pack your things. And leave." She whipped around, eyes wide. "What?" she demanded, like she had any right to be outraged. "You heard me," I said flatly. "I warned you there would be consequences if you went through with this, and trust me, they're going to be bad." A strange detachment settled over me, as if my emotions had switched off entirely. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pain. Just cold, calculated purpose. You remember that conversation we had years ago? I continued. The one where you said you had zero tolerance for cheaters? That cheating was unforgivable? I gave a hollow chuckle. Well, honey, I saw the wisdom in your words that day. And I took your philosophy to heart. Before she could answer, Dr. Linder shifted uneasily, looking like he was seriously weighing his chances of lunging at me. I took a deliberate step back, making sure to keep my hand steady, and my gun trained on him. Let's not do anything stupid, Doc, I warned, keeping Samantha in my field of vision as well. His sneer returned. You're making a mistake, Mr. Carter. I'll press charges. I laughed. A dark, humorless sound. No mistake, Doctor. But you should be afraid. Because the fear you're feeling right now? That's just the beginning. I'm going to dismantle your life piece by piece, the same way you helped destroy mine. The color drained from his face. Once he was dressed, he didn't even bother with pleasantries. He bolted out of my bedroom, down the hall, and out the front door, slamming it behind him as he shattered land speed records getting away from me. I let the silence settle, then turned to Samantha. You're done here, I said simply. Over the next hour, I put the final nails in her coffin. First, I called my lawyer, initiating divorce proceedings and preparing alienation of affection and malpractice lawsuits against Dr. Linder. Then I took care of logistics. I had a locksmith come and change every lock in the house. Right behind them, a moving company arrived to collect every single one of Sammy's belongings. I paid both services on my credit card, then immediately called the bank and canceled her cards. Next, I phoned the manager at my home bank and had him freeze her debit card, no explanations given. As the primary account holder, I didn't owe her one. For anyone who thinks I was going too far, go to hell. I poured myself a drink, no, a couple, and stared into the deep brown pools of Danny's eyes. She's gone, I muttered, barely recognizing my own voice. Probably to her parents' place. Danny didn't say anything, just waited. She was cheating on me, Danny? The words felt foreign coming out of my mouth like I was saying them about someone else. But they were real. Too real. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. The dam broke, and before I knew it, she had wrapped her arms around me, holding me as I completely fell apart. I buried my face against her shoulder, ruining her blouse with my tears, but she didn't pull away. I clung to her, desperate for any kind of human connection, any reassurance that I wasn't just completely drowning in this. When I finally ran out of tears, Danny gently pushed me back and looked into my eyes. Nick, listen to me. Are you absolutely sure that Sammy was cheating? I couldn't trust my own voice, so instead I reached for my phone. I pulled up the video, the undeniable evidence of my wife and Dr. Linder in my house, in my bed. I pressed play and handed it to Danny. She watched in silence, her jaw tightening, her fingers clenching around the phone. When the video ended, she exhaled sharply and set it down on the table. I told you I'm in, Chief, she said, her voice steady. And you know I don't back down. Then she smiled just a little and leaned in to hug me tightly. I know Sammy, Nick, she murmured against my shoulder. I've known her almost as long as I've known you. And I think she was coerced, at the very least, by that cabron. I nodded. I think so too. But even if that's the case, I'm not going to do what she did. My revenge. I shook my head. It's going to be a whole lot worse. Still, there was a part of me that hesitated. Not for Sammy's sake, but for Danny's. If Sammy really had been manipulated, if Dr. Linder had gotten into her head somehow, then Danny would be devastated when I decided to work things out with my wife. Not that I'd made that decision yet. We left in her car and swung by the office to pick up the van. From the back, I grabbed a pair of Comcast sign magnets and slapped them onto the sides of the van, urban camouflage at its finest. On the way to Dr. Linder's office, Danny filled me in on the dirt she had dug up. Turns out, the good doctor was a serial womanizer. There were records of previous malpractice accusations, allegations of sexual harassment, women who had come forward, only for the charges to mysteriously disappear. No real consequences, just the usual misunderstanding excuse when questioned by the police. Dennis Linder wasn't just intelligent, he was dangerous. Not in the street-smart kind of way, but in the way that made him skilled at manipulation, at seduction. He knew exactly how to prey on vulnerable women, to twist their emotions and make them think he was the only one who truly understood them. And now, I was going to take him down. I already hated the guy. But now I was ready to kill him. Not that I was going to do anything yet. If someone cared enough to stop me, so be it, but at that moment I wasn't worried about it. By the time Danny and I got back to my place, it was well past 1 a.m. I pulled into the garage, shut the door behind us, and barely had time to process the night before Danny blindsided me. "I'm staying the night, Nick," she said firmly, leaving no room for argument. I blinked at her. "All right. You can have the guest room." "No, Nick," she corrected, her voice unwavering. "I'm staying in your room. In your new bed. And I'm not taking no for an answer. You shouldn't be alone tonight." I let out a long breath, too tired to argue. "Danny? Even if we don't?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "That's not what this is about. I just don't want you alone tonight." I didn't fight her on it. I didn't want to be alone either. But later, as I lay in bed, reality hit me like a freight train. The bed was different, but the memories still clung to the space. The betrayal felt fresh, like a wound that refused to clot. Sammy had really cheated on me. She had really left me. It wasn't just a dream. It wasn't some bad nightmare I could wake up from. The weight of it crushed me, and before I knew it, Danny was holding me close. She wasn't saying anything, just there. God, she was really putting on the full court press. I had to put a stop to it before it went too far. "Danny, listen to me, okay?" My voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. She pulled back slightly, nodding reluctantly. "I'm sorry for that. Just now." I swallowed hard. For a second, I thought yesterday was just some terrible dream. I'd be lying if I said I never thought about you that way, but I hesitated. I love my wife. Or at least, the woman she used to be before that scumbag got into her head. Danny didn't say anything at first, just gave me a long, searching look before finally nodding. The next morning, I woke to the smell of bacon, cheese, and salsa. My first real smile in days tugged at the corner of my mouth. I walked into the kitchen to find Danny at the stove, wearing one of my old t-shirts and the jeans she had on last night. She moved around with practiced ease, flipping an omelet with a flick of her wrist. "Smells good," I said, my voice rough with sleep. She shot me a too cute grin over her shoulder. "Thanks, Nick." Then she turned back to the stove, focused on her work. I took a seat, watching her as she cooked. My eyes drifted to the holster at her hip. Danny never went anywhere without her Lady Smith & Wesson 9mm. She had gotten her concealed carry permit not long after I hired her, and I didn't mind one bit. A moment later, she plated our omelets and set them down at the counter, handing me a fresh cup of coffee. God bless Danny. As we sat down to eat, I took a sip of coffee and gave her a measured look. "Danny, there's something you should know." She raised a brow. "What do you mean?" I sighed, setting my mug down. "I never worked for an insurance company." She frowned. "What?" "I worked for the company," I clarified, watching for her reaction. "I was a covert operative." Danny's eyes widened, then narrowed as realization dawned. "Nick," she started, her voice carefully even. I smirked. Yeah, I know. Sounds like a bad opening line from Burn Notice." Danny just stared at me for a long moment before shaking her head. Then, with a sigh, she took a bite of her omelet and muttered, "God, I need more coffee for this. I can cook, sort of. Enough to keep myself alive, at least." There are two schools of thought when it comes to the way to a man's heart. Some say it's through his stomach, others say it's through his will. For me, it's both. Granted, Sammy was wild in bed, was my tornado in bed. And she could cook reasonably well. But, and you knew there was a but coming, Danny's skill in the kitchen put Sammy to shame. If she was even half as good in bed as she was with a frying pan, I was seriously considering trading up. Even if Sammy had been manipulated by Dr. Linder, that wasn't enough to excuse everything she had done. I kept watching the videos, studying every detail, every subtle shift in Sammy's expressions, every move Linder made to manipulate her. It was all there, right from the start. In the early sessions, his tone was soft, careful, almost gentle, the way a predator lures in its prey. He asked her casual questions about her life, about how she was feeling. But then he started digging. He asked about me, about our marriage, about her family. When she spoke about me, about us, she said she loved me. She talked about her parents, about how much she cared for us all. And that's when I caught it. A sly little smile flickered across Linder's lips. It was so subtle, but I knew exactly what it meant. That was the moment. That was when he made up his mind. From there, he started asking more pointed questions, steering the conversation in just the right direction. And when the session was over, he warned her not to discuss their talks with anyone. Said it could adversely affect their future therapy sessions. That son of a witch had set her up from the start. By the fourth video, his manipulation had escalated into something worse. He got Sammy to describe her fantasies, her domination fantasies. And she complied, launching into a detailed list of things she wanted to do to me. I listened, my breath slow and measured, absorbing every word. She barely got through 2 of them before the session ended, but the damage was done. Session after session, the pattern continued. By the 7th and 8th videos, it wasn't just fantasies about me anymore. It was him replacing me. She wanted to be dominated by him. And then came the 16th video. The final one. The one that sealed her fate. This time, Sammy didn't even wait for him to say anything. She walked into his office, grabbed him by the collar and kissed him like she meant it. Then she took him. Right there on his desk with no hesitation, no coercion, just pure want. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, she told him she didn't just want a threesome. She wanted to cuckold me. With him. That was it. That was the clincher. That was the moment I knew she was beyond saving. There was no brainwashing, no manipulation strong enough to justify what she had done. She had made a choice. I closed the laptop, exhaled slowly and pulled out my phone. I dialed Janine's number. After a few rings she picked up. "Hello? Janine?" I said, my voice cool and even. "It's Nick." My voice was tight as I spoke. "Janine." "Oh, Nick. Thank you for calling," she said quickly, relief evident in her tone. "Are you starting your investigation today?" I exhaled slowly. "Actually, I've already finished it." There was a pause. "Wait, so I was right?" "You were more right than you even realized." A heavy silence stretched between us before she spoke again, more cautious this time. "Nick, would you be able to come to my house? Either tonight or tomorrow. There are things we need to discuss, both professionally and personally." She hesitated, then added, "Don't get me wrong, I'm not hitting on you. This case is just personal." I swallowed hard, my throat tightening. "I understand," I said. When I arrived, she looked at me like I had just fallen off another planet. "Janine," I started, forcing the words out. As I said on the phone, this one hit close to home. I took a deep breath and turned my laptop screen toward her. "Because you see, my wife was his latest conquest." I pressed play and the highlighted name on the video was unmistakable, Samantha Carter. Janine covered her mouth with her hands, eyes widening in shock. "Oh my God, Nick," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." She didn't hesitate. She hugged me tight. And when she pulled back, there was fire in her eyes. "He's going to pay for this," she said, voice trembling with fury. "Be sure of that. He's going to pay through the godforsaken ground for what he's done." I nodded, my mind already racing ahead. "Janine, how much is your husband worth? Monetarily?" Her lips curled into a humorless smirk. "Oh, don't you worry about that. We got to work immediately. The plan comes together." To keep things quiet, I advised her to tell someone she trusted, maybe a close friend or family member, that she needed to leave town for a while. Meanwhile, I made an offer. "I've got a guest room with a queen-sized bed and space for 2 more cars in my garage," I told her. I handed her a remote for the garage door, which she accepted gratefully. She left to pack, and Danny did the same, disappearing for half an hour before returning with an entire week's worth of clothes. I chuckled as she hauled her stuff straight into my room, taking over Sammy's old dresser like it had always belonged to her. We were ready. Bringing Linder down. Over the next few days, we tracked down every single one of his former spouses. 9 ex-wives. 12 ex-husbands. I was ex-husband number 12. We got in touch with all of them. Every single person that man had wronged. To speed things up, Wesley, the best lawyer I knew, drew up identical malpractice and alienation of affection lawsuits, simply swapping out the names depending on who was filing. He was giddy about the whole thing like a kid in a candy store. And why wouldn't he be? Dr. Linder had over $175 million in liquid assets and nearly $100 million in properties around the world. And now, he was about to lose every last cent. But I wasn't just going after his money. I was going to ruin his name. Destroying his reputation. I made sure the media got involved. Law enforcement got involved. Using advanced editing software, I took Sammy's videos and scrubbed them, blurring her face, altering her voice, removing any mention of her or my name. Because this wasn't about revenge against her. This was about him. And by the time I was done, Dennis Linder wouldn't just lose his wealth. He'd lose his entire life. I carefully spliced together segments from multiple videos, creating a clear picture of Dr. Dennis Linder's pattern. How he made a habit of seducing women away from marriages that were either happy or had the potential to be saved. He wasn't just offering therapy, he was systematically destroying relationships, not out of professional concern, but for his own twisted ego. And now, the world was about to see him for exactly what he was. Later that evening, Samantha sat across from me looking hopeful, delusional really. I exhaled, then spoke calmly. "Samantha, I need to tell you something." I smiled, though there was no warmth in it. She straightened as if she thought there was still hope. I shook my head. I would have been able to forgive almost anything if you had been coerced or brainwashed by that jerk. I meant it. If she had been manipulated, if she had been trapped, I might have been able to understand. But then I leaned forward, my expression hardening. But after watching 16 hours of footage, seeing you willingly go along with everything he suggested even after some weak protests, and then hearing you suggest cuckolding me to live out your domination fantasy? I shook my head slowly. That, I said, my voice firm, I cannot forgive. And I will not forget. Samantha opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to beg. I didn't care. This conversation was over. The divorce negotiation. The next morning we met with her lawyer, Albert, an older man who probably thought this was just another messy divorce. I didn't waste any time. Let me be clear, I said, keeping my tone steady. These terms? I gestured toward the settlement offer on the table. They're unacceptable. Albert sighed as if he had expected resistance. Well, Mr. Carter? I cut him off. I have enough evidence to sway any judge and any jury to my side. I leaned in slightly, making sure he understood exactly what I was saying. The videos show my soon-to-be ex-wife actively plotting with her lover to humiliate me. It wasn't just his idea, it was hers. Albert's lips thinned, but I could see the shift in his posture. For the record, I continued, I am not into that lifestyle. Never was. Never will be. I sat back. And given the circumstances, I believe my proposal is more than generous. Albert sat in silence for a long moment before asking, and where is this evidence? I just smiled. Right where it needs to be. Waiting for the divorce to be finalized. Waiting for the court date was maddening. With the Linder case behind us, we hadn't taken any new clients. There was nothing to distract me, nothing to keep me occupied except watching the hours crawl by. And then there was Danny. Every day we'd dance around each other, pretending like nothing had changed. Every night we'd end up making out like teenagers, hot, desperate, needing each other. But I still couldn't bring myself to go all the way with her. Not yet. Not until the divorce was official. Danny didn't push me. But I could tell she was waiting, patient but just as frustrated as I was. By the end, even I was starting to think I was being stupid. The day of the verdict. Finally, the court date arrived. We filed into the courtroom, the tension thick in the air. The judge looked over the documents, the evidence, the testimonies. Then he raised his gavel. Bang. And just like that, I was free. The moment the gavel hit, I turned to Danny and pulled her into my arms. It was over. The lies. The betrayal. The weight of it all. And now it was just us. The aftermath. The lawsuits against Dr. Linder moved swiftly, each one piling onto the last. Malpractice, alienation of affection. You name it, he was facing it. His reputation was obliterated, his career in shambles. Most of his victims, the ex-wives, the ex-husbands, walked away with huge settlements. I heard that a few of them even retired after the payouts. Good for them. As for Samantha? I heard from her shortly after the lawsuits started raining down. Apparently she had moved to Las Vegas, and was now working as a dominatrix. Fitting, really? Linder had unlocked something in her psyche and now she was leaning into it full force. Her parents? They still weren't speaking to her. Can't say I was surprised. After all, I had sent them the video. A surgical strike, precise and devastating. They knew exactly what kind of woman their daughter had become. No one was coming to her rescue. And as for Linder? The man who had ruined so many lives? He was now literally at the end of his rope. Fitting if you ask me. His will hadn't been updated, which meant Janine, his widow, was left with everything. And she? She was more than happy to take her massive inheritance and use it to settle with the people whose lives her now-deceased ex-husband had wrecked. Justice. Perfect. Absolute. And final. Danny and me. Danny and I? We made out like fat cats. Between the malpractice and alienation of affection lawsuits, my personal settlement alone came out to $15 million. I couldn't help myself. I placed my pinky to the side of my mouth and grinned. $15 million? I said, channeling my best Dr. Evil impression. Danny laughed, rolling her eyes. You dork. We were set for life. So we did the logical thing. We retired. And now, we're raising our two beautiful children. Our son, Nate, came first, a firecracker from the moment he could crawl. Stubborn like me, sharp like Danny, with a mischievous streak that kept us on our toes. 2 years later, our daughter Emma arrived. She had Danny's deep brown eyes, my grin, and an uncanny ability to get away with anything. Life slowed down in the best way possible. No more chasing cheating spouses. No more late-night stakeouts. No more cases that left us questioning the worst in people. We settled into something real, something good. Danny and I traveled, watched our kids grow, and spent lazy mornings making breakfast together, her still in my t-shirts, flipping omelets like she had that first morning after everything fell apart. Samantha? She stayed in Vegas, thriving in her new world. We never spoke again. Her parents never forgave her. But she made her choices and I made mine. Janine used her late husband's fortune to pay back everyone he'd ever wronged, then disappeared into a quiet life. I sent her a Christmas card once. She never wrote back, but I knew she was okay. And Linder? He was a ghost. A cautionary tale of a man who played God with people's lives and lost everything in the process. As for me, I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I won. Because at the end of it all, I had Danny. I had my family. I had peace. And that was worth more than every dollar in my bank account. The end.